One thing that people find really intimidating are pan sauces, when really they're the easiest thing in the world, if you know how to do it. So that's what I'm gonna show you how to do today. Now, there's one thing you need to know before making a pan sauce, and that's how to make a thickening agent. There's all sorts of different thickening agents that you can use, but the easiest is cornstarch, and that's this right here. But there's a trick to cornstarch, and it's that you can't just dump it in your pan, because if you just dump it in, like, it clumps like that, and you know, God himself's not gonna get those clumps out. Like, you would have to blend it, and then it's ridiculous. It's a mess. So what we do first is we create a slurry, and a slurry is simply a starch mixed with a liquid. So this has to be cold water, because if you use hot water, it's actually going to cause the cornstarch to start thickening immediately, which is what we don't want. Cornstarch will actually start thickening as soon as you apply it to heat. So we're going to put it in this cold water here. Set this off to the side, and we got a little whisk, or you can use a fork, and you just whisk it. Now, this looks like not a lot of water. This is like a little under 1/4 cup. This is maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of water, and I put in a big heaping tablespoon of cornstarch. And you would be surprised at how much cornstarch water will hold. Like, I swear, there have been times where I've had like 1/4 cup of water, and I've put like 1/2 cup of cornstarch in there. It's ridiculous. But if you're just making a small amount of sauce, you actually don't need very much. A teaspoon to a tablespoon is a good amount. So we've got this all mixed up. Remember, the water's got to be cold. As long as it's cold, this will sit for a few minutes. Now, what we've got here is we've got our pork chop, which is what we're going to do. We're going to take this pork chop and we're going to saute it until it cooks through, and then it's going to develop a nice like fond on the bottom. And then what we're going to do is remove the pork and put it on a plate, and then we're going to do our pan sauce. One thing you want to remember to do is salt your pork 12 to 24 hours ahead of time with a pretty generous amount of salt, so that the salt seeps into the middle of the meat and seasons it from within. Alrighty, I've got my stainless steel pan over a medium-high heat, and you can use a cast iron pan too. Actually, cast iron works really well. The only thing you cannot use is a nonstick pan, because the whole base of your pan sauce is sticking, and if you have a nonstick pan and there's no stick, there's nothing to make your sauce from. So we've got a hot pan. I'm going to add maybe 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So you want to cook the oil until you get a really good shimmer. And if you look at the surface of the oil, you'll see it actually start to move a little bit. It's actually got like a texture to it. It goes from being smooth to being textured. And that's how you know it's hot enough. And another way to test, and actually this is the dangerous way to do it, but I would get yelled at if I did this in culinary school. So you take a little bit of water and you throw a drop of water in there. It splatters all over the place, so you just need a hint of water. But once it splatters, you know that it'll be hot enough for your pork chop. So we're going to put our pork chop in there, and you're going to hear it splatter really well. And you want to make sure that you've got oil all over the pan where you're going to put the pork chop, which will help it keep from sticking. So in it goes. And it's going to sit there till it browns, actually. Now, the key with browning meat is you don't want to mess with it. And the reason why people love nonstick pans is because things don't stick. You know, you lose your browning at that point because you want it to stick to develop a fond. That's that beautiful Maillard reaction. There's a thing about stainless steel pans, and if you put hot food in a stainless steel pan and it sticks, that's actually really good information, because that means that it's not seared yet. When your food is completely seared and ready to turn, it no longer sticks. So that's really good. It's a really good indicator to know when it's ready to turn. So this is still cooking. You'll notice it's not moving, like the pan actually moves when I try to move it. That means it's not done yet. So we're gonna let this cook for a few more minutes until it doesn't stick anymore. Alrighty, so this has been cooking for a little while now, and it's got an amazing smell. And I'm gonna show you something really cool. Remember how stuck it was before when I tried to move it? It actually moved the pan. Watch this. Oh, see, it's still sticking a little bit, but it's ready to come up. Look at that. It's off. Look at that beautiful sear. Isn't that gorgeous? That's what good seared meat should look like. So we're going to give this a good little wash of the oil. And now we're going to do the other side. And again, we're just going to put that down. And we're going to wait another few minutes for it to continue to sear. Alrighty, we've got our pork chop. It's browned on all 4 sides. And you don't have to do this with just 1 pork chop. I'm doing it just for the sake of demo. You could easily put 2 or 3 in here. One thing you want to keep in mind is, like, this is on a pretty high heat. This is on like medium to medium high heat because you want it to really sear. You've got oil in here. Like, you might notice it's starting to burn a little bit, in which case tip your pan like this. And what it'll do is it'll take the oil that's inside the pan and run it back over those burny bits. And like you'll see when I pick it up, you'll see that it kind of like runs back and forth over the pan, and it kind of like re-moisturizes those areas that are burning, and it gives them a little bit more life. So we're gonna pull this pork chop out and set it on our plate. And I'm gonna take this dirty plate that had the raw one in it and put it aside. Get rid of this olive oil. Now I wanna show you what's on here. You see this? This is fond. This is beautiful fond. This is probably like the most tasty thing that will ever come out of your kitchen. This is the foundation of your sauce, this brown stuff. See how it scrapes off a little bit? And the goal is to make sure it's not burnt, but this is literally right on the edge of burning. Like this is that golden spot, that like golden moment that you really want to capitalize on. So now that our fond is ready, what we're gonna do is we're going to deglaze the pan. And you can do this with almost any liquid. You can do it with water, you can do it with chicken stock, you can do it with my favorite, which is wine. You can even do it with apple juice. Actually, pork chops and applesauce or apple juice are incredibly good. So if you're in a household with kids maybe, or you don't want to use alcohol, apple juice is a great option. So we're gonna add maybe a 1/4 cup of wine to this pan, and it's gonna make a lot of noise, so listen up. Woo. Woo. Now, if you look, it's already like pulled up a lot of our fond. Like it's pulled it up, all that brownie goodness is now in the liquid. What we're gonna do is kind of swirl it around, make sure all the fond is picked up. We're gonna scrape a little bit with a paddle. We're gonna let it bubble for a second so that it can bubble off some of that alcoholic flavor. If you're doing this with apple juice, you don't need to let it cook for very long. Or if you're doing it with water or chicken stock, you don't need to cook it for very long either. Or if you really like the flavor of wine, actually, you don't need to cook it for very long. I just prefer to cook it off a little bit. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to take the slurry that we made earlier. We're gonna give it a good stir because it kind of congeals down at the bottom. And we're gonna pour just a little bit in. Boop. And we're gonna stir this constantly until it starts to thicken. There we go, it's heating up. The cornstarch is thickening. It's looking really good. Now we're gonna finish it with probably the most important part, besides salt, is butter. This is about maybe half a tablespoon of butter. We're gonna drop that in, and we're gonna melt it, and it's gonna really add a velvety feel to this pan sauce. I'm actually gonna grab a little bit of sauce too. So the meat was salted, so we're gonna add a little bit of salt, and then we're gonna taste it. We're gonna let that butter melt. We're gonna mix it all together. It's gonna thicken. It's beautiful sauce. All that gorgeous browning from the pork chop has now been like pulled into the wine and pulled into the starch. And we're done. Alrighty, we've got our sauce. It's nice and thick. It's beautiful. It smells great. We've got the butter in there. We've cooked off a lot of that wine flavor. And what I want to taste for now is salt. So I'm going to take a little taste. That's really good. Alrighty, now we're going to take our pork chop and we're going to take our pan sauce and we're just going to spoon it over the pork chop. Come here. You want to try and do it as pretty as possible so it doesn't clump up. And there you go. You've got a perfectly thick pan sauce. It just sort of falls off the edges of the pork chop. And how are you gonna beat that? Isn't that gorgeous? That's it. That's how easy a pan sauce is. Super simple.